Exile in the remote peaks of Montana was supposed to be quiet, but what the weathermen dubbed the storm of the century brought more than just 6 feet of snow to Tessa's doorstep. At 3:00 a.m., the scratching began. Not one wolf, but 20 massive beasts surrounding her buried cabin, desperate for entry. Believing she was offering sanctuary to a dying pack, the hidden Omega opened her door to the freezing night. She had no idea she was staring into the golden eyes of the Alpha King himself, or that by saving his life, she had inadvertently triggered a war. The thermometer outside the kitchen window had shattered 3 hours ago. The red mercury hadn't just dropped, it had surrendered. Tessa wrapped the wool blanket tighter around her shoulders, her breath puffing out in white clouds within her own living room. The generator had died at dusk, choked out by the ice that coated the fuel line. Now, the only light in the cabin came from the cast-iron fireplace, where the last of her dry oak logs were turning to ash. She was 24 years old, but tonight she felt 80. "Just survive the night, Tessa," she whispered to herself, rubbing her gloved hands together. "Just survive the night, and tomorrow you can hike down to the ranger station." But she knew that was a lie. The radio had been screaming warnings about blizzard cyclops for 2 days before the signal cut out. Blackwood Ridge, usually a scenic getaway for hikers, was now a death trap. And for someone like her, an unregistered Omega hiding from the pack registry, this cabin wasn't just a home. It was a cage. Tessa wasn't supposed to exist. In the modern world, Omegas were rare, treated like precious commodities, or bargaining chips by the powerful alpha families. After her parents died in a car accident that smelled suspiciously like a pack dispute, Tessa had run. She'd changed her name, dyed her hair, and paid cash for this rotting cabin off the books from a shady landlord named Mr. Henderson. A sudden thud against the front door made her jump. She froze. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the window panes, but that thud had been solid, heavy. She grabbed the fire poker, her knuckles turning white. Bears were supposed to be hibernating. Mountain lions usually avoided structures. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound was unmistakable. Claws on wood. Tessa crept toward the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached the frosted peephole and wiped it with her thumb, squinting into the abyss. All she saw was white. The snow was falling so hard it looked like static on an old television. Then she saw them. Eyes. Glowing, reflective orbs floating in the darkness. 2, then 4, then 10. Tessa stumbled back, gasping. Oh God. It was a pack, a massive one. In the wild, wolves avoided humans, but the supernatural world was different. Shifters in their wolf forms were intelligent, but they were still driven by instinct when the elements turned against them. And if they were feral, wolves who had lost their human humanity, they would tear through that door like it was wet paper. Another heavy impact shook the cabin. A low whine filtered through the cracks in the doorframe. It wasn't a growl of aggression, it was a sound of pain. Tessa gripped the poker tighter. Don't open it. You're an Omega. If they smell you, you're dead. Or worse, captured. But the whine came again, desperate and keening. It sounded like a pup. Tessa's biology betrayed her. The Omega instinct, the overwhelming need to nurture and protect, flared up in her chest, hot and painful. She cursed under her breath. I am going to get killed because I'm soft, she muttered. She moved to the window adjacent to the door and wiped the frost away. She pressed her face to the cold glass. The porch was swarming, massive shapes, dark grey and timber brown, huddled together against the siding of her house. They were piling onto each other for warmth. The wind chill was 40 below zero. Even shifters couldn't survive that forever if they were injured or exhausted. and they were injured. She could see dark stains on the snow. Blood. Fresh, steaming blood. Right in the center of the huddle lay a wolf the size of a small pony. His fur was pitch black, a void in the white storm. He wasn't moving. The other wolves were frantically licking his face, nudging him, trying to get him to stand. He was the leader, and he was dying. Tessa looked at the fire, then back at the freezing beasts. If that black wolf died on her porch, the rest of the pack might go into a frenzy of grief and rage. If she let them in, they might kill her. It was a gamble, a terrible, stupid gamble. She set the poker down and picked up the heavy iron bar she used to secure the door. "If you eat me," she shouted at the wood, her voice trembling, "I'll give you terrible indigestion." She lifted the bar. The scratching stopped instantly. Silence fell, heavier than the snow. Tessa unlocked the deadbolt. She turned the knob. The wind kicked the door open, slamming it against the inside wall with a violence that nearly knocked her over. Snow exploded into the room, and then they poured in. It was a flood of fur and ice. They didn't attack. They didn't lunge. They practically fell inside, scrambling over the threshold, slipping on the hardwood floor. 1, 2, 5, 10. Tessa pressed herself flat against the wall, counting in horror as 20 massive wolves squeezed into her tiny living room. The smell hit her instantly. Wet dog, copper blood, and ozone. The scent of raw power. The last 2 wolves dragged the massive black beast in between them. He was limp, a dead weight. They pulled him toward the fire and collapsed, panting heavily. Tessa stood by the open door, freezing, staring at the sudden invasion. The cabin was packed. There was barely room to stand. 20 sets of yellow and amber eyes turned toward her. One wolf, a sleek, russet-colored female, stepped forward. She didn't growl. She dipped her head low, a clear sign of submission and gratitude, then looked pointedly at the door. Tessa blinked, shaking herself out of her trance. She slammed the door shut and threw the deadbolt, cutting off the howling wind. The silence that followed was suffocating. She was trapped in a 500-square-foot room with 20 apex predators. And then the black wolf let out a wet, rattling cough. Tessa looked at him. Up close, he was terrifying. His head was massive, his paws the size of dinner plates, but his side was matted with blood. A deep, jagged gash ran from his shoulder to his flank. It wasn't a claw mark. It looked like a silver burn. Silver, that meant hunters, or worse, assassins. Tessa knew she should retreat to the loft and pull the ladder up. She should hide, but the Omega in her was screaming, louder than her fear. "He's in pain. Help him." She took a step toward the fire. A grey wolf growled low in its throat, snapping its jaws. "Hey!" Tessa snapped, pointing a finger at the grey wolf. "My house, my rules. If you want him to live, you let me pass." The grey wolf looked stunned. It wasn't used to humans, let alone a small woman in oversized flannel pajamas, ordering it around. The russet female nudged the grey one aside. She looked at Tessa with intelligent, pleading eyes. Tessa grabbed her first aid kit from the kitchen counter and knelt beside the black wolf. The heat coming off him was intense, like a furnace. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and touched his neck to check for a pulse. His fur was coarse but soft underneath. His pulse was thready and erratic. As soon as her skin touched his, a shock wave went through her. It wasn't static electricity. It was a jolt of recognition. A pull. The black wolf's eyes flew open. They weren't yellow or amber. They were gold. Molten, liquid gold. He looked at her, and for a second, the pain seemed to vanish from his gaze, replaced by confusion and hunger. Tessa pulled her hand back, her breath hitching. You're a heavy one, aren't you?" she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. She didn't know it yet, but she wasn't just touching a wolf. She had just laid hands on Silas Vane, the Alpha King of the Western Territories. And she, a hidden Omega, was the only thing keeping him from death's door. The cabin smelled of rubbing alcohol and fear. Tessa worked quickly, her hands stained red. The wound on the black wolf's flank was nasty. It was definitely silver. The flesh was seared and refused to knit together like normal shifter wounds. "I need hot water," Tessa announced to the room, not really expecting an answer. To her shock, the russet female trotted into the kitchen. She used her nose to nudge the handle of the water pump. It was frozen. The wolf looked back at Tessa, whined, and then, with a shimmer of air, the wolf's form cracked and shifted. Bones realigned, fur receded into skin. In 3 seconds, a naked, shivering woman with dark red hair stood in Tessa's kitchen. She didn't seem to care about her nudity. She grabbed a pot, filled it with snow from a bucket by the door, and set it on the wood stove. "Thank you," the woman said, her voice hoarse. "Please, save him." Tessa tried not to stare. "I'm trying, but this is silver poisoning. I have to cut the dead tissue out before I can stitch it." The woman nodded, her face pale. "Do it. He can take it. He's strong." Tessa turned back to the black wolf. Silas, though she didn't know his name yet. He was watching her. He hadn't shifted back, likely because the injury was too severe. Shifting took energy he didn't have. "This is going to hurt," Tessa told him. "I don't have anesthesia. I have whiskey." She poured half the bottle of cheap bourbon over the wound. The wolf didn't flinch, but his claws dug into her hardwood floor, gouging deep grooves into the planks. Tessa took her scalpel. She kept a well-stocked medical kit, a necessity for someone who couldn't visit hospitals without risking a blood test, and began to work. For an hour, the only sounds in the cabin were the crackling fire, the howling wind outside, and the occasional whimper from the pack. The other 18 wolves sat in a semicircle, watching her every move. It was like performing surgery in a coliseum. When she finally tied off the last stitch, she slumped back, wiping sweat from her forehead. "It's done," she said. "If the fever breaks by morning, he'll live." The red-headed woman, now wrapped in one of Tessa's spare blankets, exhaled a shuddering breath. "You have no idea what you've done. We owe you a life debt." Tessa laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You can repay me by not eating my cat." She pointed to the loft, where her tabby cat, Barnaby, was peering down with wide, terrified eyes. "We are not animals," the woman said stiffly. "We are the vanguard." The vanguard! Tessa's blood ran cold. Every Omega knew the stories. The vanguard was the elite guard of the Alpha King. They were the executioners, the law-bringers. If they were here, that meant the king was close. Tessa looked down at the massive black wolf. He had closed his eyes, his breathing deepening into a rhythmic sleep. "He's the king, isn't he?" Tessa whispered. The woman hesitated, then nodded. "Alpha Silas." Tessa felt the room spin. She had just saved the most dangerous man on the continent. A man who enforced the registry laws. A man who, if he knew what she was, would drag her back to the city in chains. "You were ambushed," Tessa said, piecing it together. "Silver bullets, a tactical strike." "Rogues," the woman spat. "Hired by the Southern Separatists. They hit our convoy on the pass. We had to run." Tessa looked around at the pack. They were battered, bleeding, and exhausted. They weren't monsters. They were soldiers who had lost a battle. "You're safe here," Tessa said, her voice trembling. "Nobody knows this cabin exists, not even the mailman." "Good," a deep, gravelly voice rumbled. Tessa jumped. The black wolf was gone. In his place lay a man. He was sprawled on her rug, naked, covered in sweat and blood. But even in this state, he looked like a god carved from marble. He had dark hair, a sharp jawline, and a body scarred by 100 battles. He struggled to sit up, the blanket slipping off his waist. His golden eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. "What is your name?" he rasped. "Tessa," she squeaked. "Tessa. Brooks." A fake name. Silas narrowed his eyes. He took a deep breath, inhaling her scent. Tessa panicked. She wore scent blockers, expensive patches she bought on the black market, but in this close proximity, with the heat of the fire. His nostrils flared. A strange expression crossed his face. Confusion. Then possessiveness. "Tessa," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "You have steady hands, Tessa." I used to be a vet tech," she lied. Silas reached out, grabbing her wrist. His grip was iron. "You are lying." The room went silent. The red-headed woman tensed. "Your scent," Silas murmured, pulling her closer until her face was inches from his. "It's muted." "Why is it muted?" Tessa's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You smell like rain," he whispered, his eyes drifting shut as exhaustion claimed him again. "And secrets." He released her hand and fell back onto the rug, unconscious. Tessa scrambled back, clutching her wrist where he had touched her. Her skin burned. The red-headed woman watched her carefully. "He likes you." "That's unusual." Silas hasn't tolerated the touch of a woman in 5 years. Tessa swallowed hard. "I'm just the medic." "Maybe," the woman said, her eyes narrowing. "Or maybe you're the reason we survived the storm." Tessa stood up, her legs shaking. "I'm going to make coffee. If anyone else shifts, tell them to put some damn pants on." She retreated to the kitchen, but she could feel the eyes of the pack on her back, and she knew, with a sinking feeling in her gut, that the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that was brewing inside her cabin. She had saved the king. But when he woke up and realized she was a fugitive Omega, would he kiss her? Or kill her? The dawn brought no light, only a shifting shade of grey through the windows. The blizzard, Cyclops, was still hammering the mountain, burying the cabin under drift after drift. Tessa woke up with a stiff neck. She had fallen asleep in the armchair, the shotgun across her lap. Her first thought was panic. The wolves. She bolted upright. The living room was different. The chaos of the previous night had organized itself. The wolves weren't just a pile of fur anymore. They had formed a perimeter. 6 of them were awake, sitting at attention by the windows and the door. The rest were sleeping in a tight cluster near the hearth, but the rug where the Alpha King had been lying was empty. "You snore," a deep voice said from the kitchen. Tessa spun around, gripping the shotgun. Silas Vane was leaning against her kitchen counter. He was wearing a pair of sweatpants she kept for emergencies, which were laughably tight on his muscular thighs, and nothing else. He held a mug of coffee in one hand and was eating a piece of toast with the other. He looked almost fully healed. The jagged silver wound on his side was now just a pink, angry scar. The recuperative powers of an alpha were terrifying. "That's my coffee," Tessa said, lowering the gun slightly but keeping her finger near the trigger. "And those are my sweatpants." Silas took a slow sip, his golden eyes scanning her over the rim of the mug. "The coffee is stale, and the pants are restrictive, but they are better than freezing." He set the mug down and took a step toward her. The air in the room seemed to get heavier. The wolves in the living room perked up, watching their king. "Who are you, Tessa?" he asked. His voice was low, vibrating with command. I checked the perimeter. You have perimeter alarms, motion sensors, and a generator set up that could power a small hospital. This isn't a vacation home. It's a bunker. Tessa swallowed hard. I like my privacy. Privacy is a locked door, Silas countered, taking another step. This is hiding. Who are you hiding from? He was too close now. The heat radiating off him was intoxicating. Tessa's Omega instincts were screaming at her to submit, to bare her neck, to let the Alpha take control. She dug her fingernails into her palm, using the pain to ground herself. I'm hiding from people like you, she said, her voice shaking but defiant. Shifters who think they own the world. Now, back off. Silas stopped. He looked surprised. Most humans, and even most lower-ranking wolves, crumbled under his direct gaze. He tilted his head, sniffing the air again. There it is again, he murmured. Rain, lavender, and chemicals. He reached out faster than she could blink, grabbing the collar of her flannel shirt. He pulled it aside slightly. Tessa gasped and tried to jerk away, but he was immovable. His eyes narrowed as he looked at the patch of skin on her shoulder. Scent blockers, he growled. The playfulness was gone. His face was thunderous. High-grade military blockers, the kind used by spies or fugitives. He released her, and she stumbled back against the armchair. You are a wolf, he accused. But you hide your scent. You hide your aura. Why? Before Tessa could invent a lie, the russet-haired woman, Scarlet, walked in from the living room. She was wearing Tessa's oversized winter coat. Alpha, Scarlet said urgently. We have a problem. Silas didn't look away from Tessa. What is it? The storm is breaking, Scarlet said, and Knox picked up a signal on the shortwave radio. Silas finally turned. The Iron Syndicate? Yes, Scarlet nodded grimly. They're sweeping the mountain. They know we didn't die in the pass. They're tracking the blood trail. The room went deadly silent. The Iron Syndicate was a mercenary group of rogue wolves and humans who sold alpha pelts to the highest bidder. They were ruthless, efficient, and heavily armed. Silas looked at his pack. They were battered. Half of them were still in wolf form, too exhausted to shift. They had no weapons, no armor, and they were trapped in a wooden box. We leave, Silas said. We draw them away from the cabin. You'll die, Tessa said. The words left her mouth before she could stop them. Silas looked back at her. If we stay, you die. They will burn this place to the ground with you inside. You can't outrun them in this snow, Tessa argued, her mind racing. She hated them. She feared them. But she couldn't let 20 people walk out into a slaughter. They have snowmobiles. I heard the engines last night before the wind picked up. And what do you propose, little ghost? Silas asked, his voice dripping with frustration. Tessa walked past him to the kitchen island and swept a pile of magazines off the counter, revealing a hand-drawn map of the mountain. This is Blackwood Ridge, she said, pointing to a jagged line. My cabin is here. The only road up is here. If they are coming, they have to cross the Devil's Throat Bridge. Silas looked at the map, impressed despite himself. And, Tessa said, looking up at him with steel in her grey eyes. I wired that bridge with dynamite 3 years ago. Silas stared at her. Scarlet stared at her. Even the wolves on the floor seemed to perk up. You rigged a public bridge with explosives? Silas asked slowly. It's a private road, Tessa corrected. And I told you, I like my privacy. Silas looked at the map, then at Tessa. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. It transformed him from a stern king into something wilder, something reckless. Tessa, he said softly, I think I'm falling in love with you. Don't! she snapped, her cheeks burning. "Just tell me if you want to blow up a bridge or not." The plan was madness, but it was the only plan they had. It took 20 minutes to prep. Silas's vanguard, despite their injuries, were disciplined soldiers. Those who could shift into human form raided Tessa's tool shed, arming themselves with axes, crowbars, and a chainsaw. Those who remained wolves acted as scouts. Tessa was in the bedroom, pulling on her heavy snow gear. She checked her scent patches. They were peeling. The heat of the cabin and the stress were degrading the adhesive. If they fell off, Silas would know exactly what she was, an omega. And not just any omega, but a prime omega, the rarest kind, capable of calming an entire pack. If he found out, he would never let her go. She taped the patches down with duct tape. Just survive the day, she told herself. She walked out into the living room. Silas was waiting. He had found an old leather jacket in her closet. It had belonged to her father, and it fit him snugly. "You stay here," Silas ordered. "Give me the detonator. We will trigger it." "The detonator is wired to a dead man's switch in the basement," Tessa lied smoothly. "It's old tech. I have to be within range to trigger the receiver. I'm coming." Silas growled, a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. "It is too dangerous." "It's my bridge," Tessa said, grabbing her shotgun. "And I'm the only one who knows the shortcuts through the trees. Unless you want to walk down the main road and get sniped." Silas clenched his jaw. He hated this. His instinct was to lock her in the safest room and stand guard. But he was a king, and a king used every asset to save his pack. "Fine," he snarled. "But you stay glued to my side. If you wander off, I will carry you back over my shoulder." "Try it, Your Majesty," Tessa retorted, opening the back door. The cold hit them like a physical blow. The snow had stopped falling, but the wind was bitter. The world was a blinding white expanse. They moved in a formation. 5 wolves ahead, 5 behind. Silas and Tessa in the center, flanked by Scarlet, and a massive grey wolf named Nox. They moved silently through the pine forest. The snow was waist-deep in places, but the wolves broke the trail. Tessa struggled to keep up, her breath burning in her lungs. Every time she stumbled, a strong hand would grab her elbow, steadying her. Silas. He moved through the snow with unnatural grace, his eyes scanning the tree line constantly. They reached the overlook above Devil's Throat Bridge 20 minutes later. It was a narrow, wooden structure spanning a deep gorge. Below, a frozen river wound through the rocks, and across the bridge the enemy was waiting. 3 black SUVs were parked on the other side. Men in white tactical gear were unloading equipment. A heavy machine gun was being set up on a tripod. "The Iron Syndicate," Silas hissed. "That's Baron leading them." He pointed to a man standing by the lead SUV. He was huge, wearing a fur coat that looked suspiciously like wolf pelt. He held a silver-plated rifle. "They're preparing to cross," Scarlet whispered. "If they get that machine gun set up on this side, they'll shred the cabin." "Give me the detonator," Silas demanded, holding out his hand to Tessa. Tessa reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, rectangular remote with a red flip-cover switch. "Wait," she said, watching the scene below. "Not yet." "Tessa, they are crossing." 2 of the SUVs started their engines. They began to roll slowly onto the wooden planks. The bridge groaned under the weight. "Wait for the 3rd one," Tessa whispered. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was cold. Greedy bastards always stick together. The 3rd SUV, the one with Baron, hesitated. Then, seeing the others moving safely, it rolled forward. "Now," Silas barked. Tessa flipped the cover and pressed the button. Nothing happened. The silence was deafening. The SUVs continued to roll. They were halfway across. It didn't fire," Tessa stammered, frantically pressing the button again. "The cold. The battery must have died. Silas cursed, a sound that was half roar. Get back! He didn't wait. He launched himself off the ridge. Silas, no! Tessa screamed. He shifted in mid-air. It was a terrifying, beautiful sight. One moment he was a man in a leather jacket. The next, he was a massive midnight black wolf, his clothes shredding, except the jacket which he had thrown off a split second before. He landed in the deep snowbank near the bridge entrance with a thump and sprinted toward the structure. The mercenaries saw him. "Wolf!" Baron shouted. "Open fire!" Bullets tore up the snow around Silas. He didn't slow down. He was a blur of black fury. He wasn't attacking the cars, he was attacking the bridge. He reached the support beams on the near side. His massive jaws clamped onto the main timber truss. With a wrench of his neck that defied physics, he ripped the wood apart. But it wasn't enough. The bridge held. Baron leveled his silver rifle. He had a clear shot at the Alpha King. Tessa didn't think. She didn't calculate. She just reacted. She raised her shotgun, aimed not at Baron, but at the exposed fuel tank of the old generator she had mounted on the bridge years ago to power the lights, a detail she had forgotten until this second. "Please don't miss." She pulled the trigger. The kickback bruised her shoulder. The buckshot flew wide, but one pellet hit the rusty metal tank. Kaboom! The explosion wasn't massive, but it was enough. The fire ignited the old timber, soaked in creosote. The shockwave snapped the weakened support beam Silas had damaged. With a groan that sounded like a dying leviathan, the bridge gave way. The first two SUVs tilted forward and slid off the planks, tumbling into the abyss below. The third SUV, Baron's, slammed on its brakes, skidding to a halt with its front wheels dangling over the edge. Silas scrambled back as the wood collapsed in front of him. He stood on the edge of the precipice, barking ferociously at the enemies trapped on the other side. Baron climbed out of his teetering vehicle, his face twisted in rage. He looked across the chasm, locking eyes with the black wolf. Then he looked up at the ridge. He saw Tessa. "You!" Baron screamed, his voice carrying over the wind. "I know that face. You're the Brooks girl. The Omega!" Tessa froze. Silas, down by the bridge, stopped barking. His massive head snapped up toward the ridge. He looked at Tessa. The word hung in the frozen air. Omega. Baron laughed, a cruel, echoing sound. "Silas Vane, you're protecting a runaway Omega. Hand her over, and I'll let your pack live." Silas looked at the enemy, then back at Tessa. Tessa backed away, her heart stopping. The secret was out. The duct tape hadn't mattered. Her past had just caught up with her. Silas let out a roar that shook the snow from the trees. It wasn't a roar of surrender. It was a roar of possession. He turned his back on Baron and bounded up the hill toward Tessa. When he reached her, he shifted back into human form, naked, steaming in the cold, and terrifyingly angry. He grabbed her shoulders, his golden eyes blazing. "Omega!" he demanded, his voice a low growl that made her knees buckle. "Is it true?" Tessa looked at the destruction below, then up into the face of the king. There was no point in lying anymore. "Yes," she whispered. Silas stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Then he did something she didn't expect. He pulled her into his chest, wrapping his arms around her so tight she couldn't breathe, shielding her from the wind and the view of the enemy. "Mine," he growled into her hair. "You are mine, and God help anyone who tries to take you." The trek back to the cabin was silent, but the air around them crackled with a different kind of electricity. The wind had died down, leaving a heavy, suffocating stillness in its wake. Silas didn't let Tessa walk. He didn't care about her protests, or the fact that she was fully capable of hiking through the snow. He carried her, his arms like steel bands around her waist and legs, pressing her freezing body against the furnace of his chest. When he kicked the cabin door open, the warmth of the fire hit them, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop the moment he stepped inside. The 18 other wolves were awake. As Silas entered with Tessa in his arms, every single head turned. Noses twitched. The scent patches under her shirt had finally failed completely, dissolving from the sweat and the adrenaline of the explosion. The scent hit the room like a physical wave. Lilac, rainwater, and pure distilled omega pheromones. It was a biological nuke. A low, collective whine rippled through the pack. Several of the younger male wolves instinctively lowered their heads, their eyes glazing over. Omegas were cherished, protected, and rare. To find a prime omega, one powerful enough to affect an alpha king, hiding in a shack in the middle of nowhere, was unheard of. "Clear the room," Silas ordered, his voice low and dangerous. "But Alpha," Scarlet began, her eyes wide as she looked at Tessa with a mix of awe and accusation. "Get out!" Silas roared. The sound vibrated the floorboards. The pack didn't hesitate. They scrambled for the kitchen, the loft, the back porch, anywhere to escape the Alpha's dominance. Silas kicked the door shut and set Tessa down on the rug in front of the fire. He didn't back away. He loomed over her, his golden eyes sweeping over her face as if seeing her for the first time. "Take off the jacket," he commanded. Tessa shivered, clutching the lapels of her flannel shirt. "Silas, please, I can explain." "Take it off." Tessa dropped her hands. She unzipped the heavy winter coat and let it slide to the floor. She reached under her shirt and ripped the duct tape and the dissolving patches from her shoulder, wincing as the adhesive tore at her skin. She stood there, exposed. Silas inhaled deeply, his eyes fluttering shut for a fraction of a second. A shudder went through his massive frame. 5 years, he whispered. "I have hunted for my mate for 5 years. And you were here, hiding in the snow, wearing tape." He opened his eyes, and the gold was swirling with darkness. "Why?" "Because of men like Baron," Tessa said, her voice trembling but finding strength. "And men like you." Silas stiffened. "Do not compare me to that butcher." "You're the Alpha King," Tessa shouted, stepping into his space. "You wrote the registry laws. You're the reason Omegas are tracked, tagged, and assigned to Alphas like property." "My parents didn't die in a car accident, Silas. They were executed by a pack enforcer because my father refused to hand me over to the local Alpha when I presented." The silence that followed was heavy with grief. Silas looked at her, his expression shattering. "I didn't know," he said softly. "The registry was meant to protect Omegas from rogue packs, to keep them safe." "It doesn't keep us safe," Tessa whispered, tears finally spilling over. "It keeps us caged. I ran to stay free. I built this life, this cabin, this loneliness, just to own myself." Silas reached out, his hand hovering near her face. He looked at his own hand, dangerous and scarred, then at her soft skin. "I am not your cage, Tessa," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am your shield. You are my mate. That means I don't own you. It means I burn the world down for you." He touched her cheek. The bond snapped into place, hard and undeniable. Tessa gasped. It felt like a warm hook sinking into her soul, anchoring her to him. The fear she had carried for 6 years began to dissolve, replaced by a feeling she had forgotten. Safety. "Baron knows," she whispered. "He'll sell the information to the High Council. They'll come for me." "Let them come," Silas growled, pulling her against him. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling the scent he had been denied. "I'll kill every last one of them." The intimate moment was shattered by the sound of glass breaking in the kitchen. Silas spun around, shoving Tessa behind him. Scarlet stumbled into the living room, shifting from her wolf form mid-stride. She was bleeding from a gash on her head. "Alpha!" she gasped. "The back perimeter. The motion sensors didn't trip." "What?" Silas snarled. "How?" "They're inside," Scarlet coughed, collapsing to her knees. "They didn't cross the bridge. They climbed the cliff." Before Silas could react, the kitchen door exploded inward. Debris flew across the room. A flashbang grenade rolled across the hardwood floor, spinning to a stop at Silas's feet. "Down!" Silas roared, tackling Tessa and covering her body with his own. Bang! A blinding white light seared the room, followed by a high-pitched ringing that brought Tessa to her knees. She couldn't see, couldn't hear. She could only feel the floor vibrating as heavy boots stormed into her sanctuary. She blinked rapidly, trying to clear the spots from her vision. Through the haze, she saw chaos. The vanguard was fighting. Even in their human forms, Silas's wolves were lethal. Nox was wrestling a mercenary in tactical gear, throwing him through the drywall. Another wolf had bitten through the barrel of a rifle, but they were outnumbered, and the mercenaries had weapons designed for this. Shock batons and nets made of silver-infused steel. Silas was a blur of violence. He hadn't shifted. The room was too small. He was fighting hand to hand, moving with a speed that the human eye couldn't track. He snapped a man's arm like a twig, kicked another into the fireplace, and grabbed a third by the throat, crushing his windpipe. "Tessa! The loft!" Silas bellowed over the noise of the fight. Tessa scrambled to her feet. She grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the hearth, her only weapon, and backed toward the ladder. But the front door burst open. Baron walked in. The mercenary leader looked even bigger up close. He stepped over the body of one of his own men, a cruel smile on his face. He held a heavy pistol in one hand and a remote control in the other. "Enough!" Baron shouted. He pressed a button on the remote. A high-frequency sonic pulse emitted from a device strapped to his belt. It was agony. Every wolf in the room, including Silas, dropped to the floor, clutching their ears, screaming. It was a frequency tuned specifically to the sensitive hearing of a shifter. It incapacitated them instantly. Tessa, being human passing and biologically different as an Omega, felt a dull ache. But she didn't collapse. She stood alone, the skillet in her hand, surrounded by writhing wolves and laughing mercenaries. "Look at that," Baron sneered, leveling his pistol at Silas's head. The king was on his knees, blood trickling from his ears, fighting with every ounce of his will to stand up. The king is brought low by a dog whistle. Baron turned his gaze to Tessa, and the prize remained standing. "Get out of my house," Tessa said, her voice low. "Your house?" Baron laughed. "Girl, you're coming with me. Do you have any idea what a prime Omega goes for on the black market? The auction house in Dubai will pay $1 billion. Easy, especially when I tell them she tamed the Alpha King." He signaled to two of his men. "Grab her. If she bites, knock her teeth out." The men advanced. "Wait," a voice said from the corner. Tessa froze. She knew that voice. One of Silas's wolves, a lean, blonde man named Jackson, who had been guarding the back door, stood up. He wasn't affected by the sonic pulse. He was wearing earplugs. He walked over to Baron and stood beside him. "You said no rough stuff, Baron," Jackson said. "We had a deal. I disable the perimeter alarms, you get the girl, and nobody dies." Silas looked up, his golden eyes filled with betrayal. "Jackson, you are my kin." "I'm tired of being a soldier for your wars, Silas," Jackson spat, looking down at his king. "I'm tired of sleeping in the snow while you sit on a throne. Baron offered me 10 million. That buys a lot of loyalty. Tessa stared at Jackson. The traitor. That explained how they found the cabin. That explained the silver poisoning ambush on the road. It was an inside job from the start. Silas let out a growl that sounded like tearing metal. "I will rip your heart out, Jackson." "Not today, old friend," Jackson said, turning away. Baron chuckled. "Load them up. Kill the king. Take the girl." A mercenary raised his rifle, aiming it point blank at Silas's chest. Tessa's world narrowed down to a single point. She saw the finger tightening on the trigger. She saw Silas, paralyzed by the sonic weapon, unable to move fast enough. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She remembered the button under the floorboard beneath the rug. "I said," Tessa said, her voice cutting through the noise, "get out of my house." She stomped her heel down, hard, on a specific knot in the wood floor. Click. A mechanical whirring sound echoed from the basement. Boren looked confused. "What was that?" "That," Tessa said, a cold smile touching her lips, "is the cabin's self-defense mode. I told you I like my privacy." Suddenly the windows didn't just break. They exploded outward as steel shutters slammed down, sealing the cabin in darkness. Red emergency lights flickered on, bathing the room in a blood-colored glow. And then the sprinklers turned on. But it wasn't water. It was a fine, misted gas. "Gas!" Baron screamed. "Masks!" "It's not poison," Tessa said calmly, holding her breath. "It's concentrated wolfsbane extract, aerosolized." Wolfsbane, fatal to shifters in high doses, weakening in small doses, but instant paralysis for anyone with active wolf blood. The mercenaries, who were mostly humans, coughed but stayed standing. But Jackson? The traitor fell like a stone, foaming at the mouth. Silas and his pack, already down, went limp, unconscious. Baron coughed, waving the mist away. "You stupid bitch! You just killed your own boyfriend!" "No," Tessa said, grabbing a gas mask she had hidden inside the hollowed-out fireplace mantel and strapping it on. "I just leveled the playing field." She looked at the unconscious form of Silas. He was safe for the moment. The wolfsbane would keep him out, but it would stop the sonic pain. Now it was Tessa, a 5'4". Omega with a cast-iron skillet and a house full of traps against 6 armed mercenaries. She swung the skillet with both hands, connecting with the knee of the nearest soldier. Bone crunched. He went down screaming. "Kill her!" Baron shouted, firing his pistol wildly in the red-lit fog. Tessa dove behind the kitchen island. She reached under the sink and pulled the lever for the second surprise. The floorboards beneath the mercenaries, a trap door meant for dumping firewood into the cellar, dropped open. 3 men fell into the darkness below, landing with a sickening crunch on the concrete basement floor. That left Baron and 2 others. Tessa grabbed a butcher knife from the magnetic strip on the wall. She wasn't hiding anymore. The Omega was done running. "Come and get me," she whispered into her mask. The cabin had transformed into a vision of hell. Thick crimson light from the emergency strobes pulsed rhythmically, cutting through the swirling fog of aerosolized wolfsbane. The hissing of the sprinklers sounded like a nest of vipers. For a shifter, this air was poison, a paralytic agent that turned their blood to sludge. For Tessa, protected by a rubber gas mask she had scavenged years ago, it was the only thing keeping her alive. But the mask limited her vision, and her breath rasped loudly in her ears, deafening her to the subtle movements of the predator stalking her. "Come out, little Omega," Baron's voice echoed, distorted by the fog but terrifyingly close. "The gas won't last forever, and neither will you." Tessa pressed her spine against the rough wood of the kitchen island. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She gripped the heavy butcher knife until her knuckles turned white. She was alone. The vanguard, 20 of the deadliest wolves in existence were scattered across the floor, unconscious heaps of fur and muscle. Even Silas, the invincible king, lay motionless by the hearth. She had leveled the playing field, but she hadn't cleared the board. "I know you're behind the counter, Tessa," Baron taunted. He kicked a wooden chair aside, the crash sending a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. "You have spirit. The buyers in Dubai love a fighter. It makes breaking them so much sweeter." Tessa closed her eyes. She couldn't outpower him. She needed a distraction. She reached blindly onto the counter, grabbing a heavy ceramic jar filled with metal utensils. Taking a deep breath of the rubber-tasting air, she hurled it toward the shattered window on the far side of the room. Crash! "There!" Baron roared, firing 3 rounds into the shadows near the noise. In that split second, Tessa moved. She launched herself out from behind the island, sliding across the polished floor on her knees. She ducked under the swing of his rifle barrel and slashed the butcher knife across his thigh. Baron howled, a raw, human sound of shock. He staggered back, clutching his leg. "You bitch!" he screamed. Tessa scrambled to her feet, but her socks slipped on the slick floor. She went down hard. Before she could recover, a heavy boot slammed into her back, pinning her. "Enough games," Baron panted. "I was going to keep you pretty for the auction, but now I'm going to make sure you limp for the rest of your miserable life." He stepped off her back and brought his boot down, hard, on her right ankle. Crack! A blinding flash of white-hot agony exploded up Tessa's leg. She screamed, curling into a ball. The pain was absolute, consuming her entire world. Baron leaned down, grabbing her hair. He hauled her up, ripping the gas mask off her face. "Breathe it in," he snarled, forcing her face toward the poisonous mist. "Say goodbye to your king, girl. I'm going to put a bullet in him while you watch." The wolfsbane hit her throat like acid. She gagged, her vision swimming. But through the haze, her eyes locked onto the medical bag lying just 3 feet away. "You... loose," Tessa wheezed. "What?" Baron frowned. Her fingers closed around the cold plastic of the EpiPen she had prepared earlier. With the last reserve of her strength, she swung her arm backward, bypassing Baron entirely, and jammed the needle down into the thigh of the unconscious man lying behind them. She hit Silas. The reaction was instantaneous. A roar shook the cabin, a sound so deep it felt like the earth itself was splitting open. Silas Vane shot up from the floor as if struck by lightning. The adrenaline shot, mixing with his alpha blood, had triggered a biological override, a berserker state. He stood up, his chest heaving. His eyes were no longer just gold, they burned with a terrifying violet fire. Baron turned, the color draining from his face. He raised his pistol, his hand shaking. He never got the chance to pull the trigger. Silas blurred. 1 second he was by the hearth, the next he was towering over Baron. He grabbed the barrel of the pistol with one hand and crushed it like putty. With the other, he grabbed Baron's throat. "You touched her," Silas whispered, his voice layered with the growl of a beast. "I smelled her fear. I smelled her bone break." Baron clawed at the hand, crushing his windpipe. "Mercy! Alpha!" "She is my queen," Silas roared, "and you broke her." With a wet, sickening crunch, Silas snapped Baron's neck. He tossed the body across the room like a rag doll, where it smashed through the drywall. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Silas spun around, chest heaving, scanning for threats. Then he saw Tessa slumped against the hearth, clutching her broken ankle. The violet fire in his eyes faded back to molten gold, replaced by terrified tenderness. He fell to his knees beside her. "Tessa!" he choked out. "God! Tessa!" "Ventilation!" she gasped. Silas smashed the emergency switch on the wall. The ceiling fans roared to life. sucking the red mist out and pulling in the clean mountain air. He was back at her side in a second. He bit into his own wrist, tearing the vein. "Drink," he commanded, pressing his bleeding wrist to her lips. "My blood will heal the bone. Drink." She swallowed the copper-tasting liquid. The effect was immediate. A warmth spread through her body, and the agonizing fire in her ankle receded to a dull throb. Silas scooped her up into his arms, burying his face in her neck, shaking uncontrollably. "I thought I was too late," he whispered. "I couldn't wake up. Until you saved me." "We saved each other," she whispered. Around them, the room began to stir. Scarlett was the first to rise, wiping blood from her lip. She looked at the carnage, the dead mercenary, the unconscious traitor Jackson, and then at Silas holding Tessa. Scarlett didn't speak. She dropped to one knee, lowering her head in absolute submission. Knox woke up next. He saw Scarlett. He understood. He knelt. One by one, the vanguard regained consciousness, as 20 of the fiercest warriors on Earth saw the woman who had single-handedly held off a death squad to save them, the cabin filled with the sound of knees hitting the floor. Silas stood up, lifting Tessa effortlessly. He looked at his pack's devotion, then down at the woman in his arms with fierce pride. "Behold," Silas's voice rang out, "the Alpha Queen." And so, Tessa and Silas found their happy ending, not in a golden palace, but back in the snowy mountains where their love began. What an incredible journey, from a terrified exile hiding in a storm, to the queen who changed the werewolf laws forever. Tessa proved that true power doesn't come from being an alpha or having sharp claws. It comes from courage, wit, and the will to protect what is yours. I hope you loved this dramatic story of survival and romance as much as I loved telling it. If you did, please give this video a huge thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more intense werewolf stories like this one. Now, I have a question for you. Do you think Tessa was right to show mercy and exile the traitor Jackson, or should she have let Silas handle him the alpha way? Let me know your opinion in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.